Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903.
As a constitutional law attorney, former senior legal advisor, and personal counsel to President Donald J. Trump, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Well, happy Wednesday, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Jenna Ellis Show. And wow, a lot has happened since we were last together yesterday. Of course, I was trending on Twitter and, had some really interesting conversation pieces after the January 6th circus and sham. So definitely want to talk about that today. And also, the Supreme Court has added Friday as another opinion day. So what does this mean for the Dobbs opinion that we are waiting on, the 13 other cases that are still coming down the pike? And are we preparing really for a weekend of riots? And also, gun legislation now has 14 GOP senators that are actually supporting this, including Lindsey Graham, who just a couple of days ago promised that this would not get anywhere in the Senate. So what is the future of the GOP? Why are they compromising? So to break all of this down is my good friend Brett Tolman, who I'm so excited to have on. He's the executive director of Right on Crime, a fellow attorney, and we've been doing a lot of panels together on Newsmax with our good friend John Bachman. So I said, hey, got to get you on the show so we have more than 5 or 6 minutes to go back and forth. So Brett, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Jenna. Great to be with you. I always enjoy our interactions.
Yeah, it's really been a great panel, and the Legal Eagles, and I think John Bachman has really enjoyed it as well, and he's a great host. But you always have a really great analysis and, bring it back to the law and the Constitution. So where do you want to start? Maybe the Supreme Court and looking forward to Friday? I don't know. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I think what we're missing in a lot of commentary right now is, staying grounded to facts and the law and grounded to, a landscape that is as low in politics as we possibly can, but it's getting very difficult. And so I look at this date as Friday and I say, okay, I see that they wanted to extend it. Maybe they're thinking that might be a down news day. But no day is going to be a down news day if that's when you're reversing Roe v. Wade. And so I think, I'm concerned about it because it's going to be supposedly good weather, around the country. Most of the country is going to have good weather, and we're going to see the potential for what we've seen in the last year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah, and there are already reports and pictures from some of our friends over at National Review and other places that have posted on social media and other articles on the riots that they're calling for and saying that they want a quote unquote night of rage. And so this being on a Friday, I think it's interesting that the court has now added another day on Friday. And of course, their term ends on Monday, the 27th. So this appears to be Chief Justice Roberts kind of just saying, well, let's keep business as usual. We don't want to deviate from the track. We're not going to be intimidated. And so this is keeping with past precedent that a lot of times the most significant or highly controversial opinion will come out the very last day of the term. And do you think, though, that this particular case, and given all of the violence that has already occurred with the protests, the attempted assassination of a justice, I mean, doesn't that warrant maybe a reconsideration of how they're going about dropping this opinion and on a Friday?
Yeah, I think it does. I'm very concerned. It wouldn't be as, our level of fear and caution would not be as high if we thought that the Department of Justice was certainly going to rally and try to protect the justices, or that we thought that they would, that these cities would use what resources they have in law enforcement or the National Guard to quell any riots. That's just not happening, Jenna. And we're not living in a country now that both political parties understand the value of law and order, and instead they're actually reaching for that chaos and pushing that sort of behavior in order to get their way. And it's something that I still look back and think to myself, my father talked about the Watts riots when he was a police officer in California and how devastating it was to a community. Here we're seeing it repeated over and over, and it's being driven by their political desire as opposed to, something else that might merit that kind of, response.
Yeah. And, you were a former U.S. attorney, and for people who are watching this around the country and they're so frustrated saying, why isn't the DOJ doing anything? And why are they allowed to just turn a blind eye and ignore the crime that's occurring and not be used in their functional capacity and the mandate given to them to be law enforcement? I mean, is there anything that anybody can do? I mean, what's the response to this when the DOJ is just saying, hey, we're going to go along with, having pride vehicles now and, the little hate crime mobiles going around that we saw today on Twitter. It's just insane. And they're letting these quote unquote, mostly peaceful protests happen and devastate communities.
Yeah, this, I was a federal prosecutor for about 10 years, and then I was the U.S. attorney for 4 years. And I saw a gradual sort of move by the FBI. They when I first started as a federal prosecutor, they were very engaged with the community, working violent crime, a part of task forces, local and state task forces. And really, you could see that their focus was on violence and drug interdiction and violent interdiction. But now, fast forward, and we're living in a time where I never thought I'd see the FBI appears to be pushing, political priorities over, the essential need that we have in law enforcement. And what I mean by that is I've observed, FBI agents that are being told they have to investigate every single person that was in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. I've spoken to agents that say, we've never seen anything like this, coming from the top, telling us that this is our priority. And we're meeting with these individuals that were in Washington, D.C., and we're finding that they're just regular citizens that were there, that they have a political opinion, and they were trying to express that opinion. And yet this is what's happening. It's an example of what's happening with our law enforcement. I have no confidence that Merrick Garland at the top actually knows, his role and sees it as part of the fabric of law enforcement to protect us in this country. I think he sees his position as a wingman to Joe Biden. And it's never more apparent than his refusal to do anything with respect to the justices and the picketing and parading in front of their homes, to the overemphasis of prosecution and resources on January 6th.
Yeah, and I think the practical effect here is that so many Americans are realizing how important every single state and local and federal race is, really. I mean, so many people don't really pay attention to races outside of legislators and Congress, and they focus a lot more on the legislative branch. Almost no one that I know on a state or local level even knows who, their sheriff or their local district attorney is. And that's how the left and, funded by George Soros and some of these other billionaire Democrats have been able to weaponize the law enforcement and justice system, and also, point, of course, activist judges through the judicial branch and all of those things. And I think, that Americans have seen the importance of judges. But in terms of the executive branch, what would you say are the most important offices in terms of people voting this November and paying attention in the elections to who can actually look at law enforcement and say, we need to have a better structure. We need to get back to actually doing the functions of law enforcement?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Jenna. You hit a very important issue that I think this country needs to reevaluate. So much time and attention and money is spent on these high-profile positions, national positions, for example. But the real work and the real effort in this country is being done by your local politics, and whether that's a school board that gets elected, whether your county commissioners, but even your mayors who appoint chiefs of police, your sheriffs. All of this is now more important than ever, because we're seeing, like in Uvalde, the shootings. You see a police chief who made decisions that we're now learning as horrific. It wasn't courageous. It was bad decision making and refusal to allow officers to go in and try to protect these children. How do we get to a place where that happens? Well, you do by electing people that don't have a sense of law and order, that don't have a sense of, protecting communities. We see what happened with the prosecutor out in San Francisco, Chesa Boudin, who was recalled. I think it's a very strong message that, while we all agree that the criminal justice system is not perfect and we can change a lot of it, we can't ever do anything to compromise public safety. If we do, you lose the very essence of what our civilization is aiming at, and that is to provide opportunities for families and communities to thrive.
Yeah, and it's a basic function of a civil
function
to have law enforcement, to have justice, to have community safety. And yet these same things and these terms, even justice, are being manipulated and weaponized by the left to then reinforce these really dangerous and unconstitutional ideas like red flag laws. So, getting into this whole gun control legislation from Congress. I mean, to me, not only is this completely unconstitutional in the context of the Second Amendment, but why should the federal Congress be looking at the scope of what's good for all America instead of leaving this to each state and local level to make sure that they are enforcing some of these policies? I mean, they're not even doing basic law enforcement functions. And now all of a sudden we think that red flag laws that can be very easily weaponized is the solution to everything. I mean, this just seems patently absurd. And yet we have 14 GOP senators who are like, yeah, sure, we'll reach across the aisle. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm quite disgusted, actually, and I don't use that word very often, but I am disgusted to see that, I've always had concerns about federalism and the growth of, the federal government and usurping a lot of the states' rights. And sure, that's a debate you and I can, talk with other people often and through the history of this country. But what is very offensive is to see Republicans, conservative, leaders in this country that know the value of the Second Amendment and its importance, who have also lived through COVID and seen what the government can do when you give them more power, to now come forward and to basically give a stamp of approval for red flag laws. I mean, this is the slippery slope that people talk about, where the government starts to decide subjectively who they like, who they don't, and who they're going to allow to have guns or not. Now, I've heard people come back and say, oh, there's going to be due process. Not really. The due process, it could be as simple as one individual calling and saying, hey, I saw somebody post some pictures of guns on Instagram, and I really think that they're unstable. I think you should take a look at it. And they have the ability to get an ex parte order to pull those guns away from that individual. And then after the fact, he or she has to prove that what was represented is false and not sufficient to have his Second Amendment rights taken away. That's dangerous. That's not what the foundation of this country was built on. And it's certainly not what, our due process rights or the Second Amendment is built on. And so I had one senator, I won't name names, but I had a senator reach out to me and ask me my opinion of some of the provisions that were going into this compromise agreement. And I expressed my issues with it and the fear and the slippery slope argument that is going to bound to come. And his response was, we have to do something. We just have to do something. And that's scary to me because we should be legislating reluctantly, not eagerly.
Yes. And saying do something is more concerned about the court of public opinion than what will happen ultimately in a court of law. And as you said, Brett, I hope that people listening really understand exactly how this is going to work and how and why red flag laws are dangerous. Because when you talk about an ex parte hearing, that just means that one person who is the complainant goes in and the defendant, the person who is being accused of being unstable, that's a very subjective term. What are the red flags? Is it going to be you think conservatively, you wear a red hat, you voted a certain way? What makes someone unstable, right? So they go in and you have this petition or this affidavit, and it's looked at by a judge who then makes a decision and can foreclose and suspend someone's right to keep and bear arms for a period of time until there is a hearing, at which point that defendant will have to come in and show to the court that they aren't unstable, that they do have the ability to exercise their rights in a quote unquote safe manner. This happens all the time in the context of civil protection orders. And I've seen that. I know you've seen that. When I was a prosecutor, when I've been a defense attorney, I've been on both sides of civil protection orders, criminal protection orders, in terms of prosecuting and defending them. And unfortunately, in my experience, judges are so reluctant to not at least grant a temporary until there is a hearing for a permanent protection order, especially in a criminal context, because they're thinking, well, if something happens, I don't want anybody to come back in the news media to say, what was wrong with that judge? They didn't see the warning signs. They didn't take this person seriously. That will happen with red flag laws. And that is really, really dangerous. And so when we're talking about this concept of due process, Brett, I've never seen a red flag law that I think is actually constitutional. Have you?
Think about how civil asset forfeiture is going to play in conjunction with the red flag laws. They're going to take the guns, and let's say that you're successful. I know of instances where it doesn't matter if you're acquitted of a crime. If they started a civil asset forfeiture on your guns, they're going to take those even if you end up being successful. So in my view, this can be used in conjunction with other laws to actually just remove the guns, regardless of whether or not you're successful in the hearing that you ultimately get.
Wow, that is
so this is a gun grabbing exercise where judges like you identified are not going to want to rule against the government, but they're also not going to want to return the guns. So what do? You file for forfeiture. I have a case right now, an individual that had a gun in a restricted area. It turned out that there was no criminal intent. And the DA agreed to dismiss the charges and would not give the gun back. So indicated that they would just simply forfeit it, even though they dismissed the underlying case. And so that's what we're up against. And a lot of people don't realize the interaction between the two types of laws.
Yeah, and that is such an excellent point. And often as well, there are different plea agreements and other things that can be reached to just say, all right, well, if you're willing to just give up and forfeit the gun, then we'll go ahead and drop anything else remaining. And so I can see a lot of coercion there, a lot of people. So what is going on with the GOP and these legislators who aren't thinking about these things, aren't paying attention, and they're not listening.
There's no excuse right now for any of these GOP members to be part of this. It seems to me, I spent 4 years working as chief counsel in the Judiciary Committee. And I remember being told the big, Achilles heel for Republicans is they always believe that if they will compromise that, when they're in the minority, that the Democrats will compromise, when the roles are reversed. They don't. The Democrats never compromise. The Republicans do. They give up rights. We saw it after 9/11. We were willing to give up a lot of rights in the Patriot Act and otherwise. And it's Republicans that, unfortunately, I think they always are naively approaching, the issues, and they do it based on emotion at the time. And you look at some of the Republicans that are involved in this, they're highly emotional senators that are involved.
Yeah, and they're also very highly attuned to what the media thinks about them instead of what they should be doing and what their constituents
Great
and what
point.
the Constitution thinks about things. I mean, definitely Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, just to name a few, are very attuned. I mean, Lindsey Graham cares more about going on Fox News and having his 30 seconds on Sean Hannity when he does something great, and then he will just roll over at the next thing. I mean, it's absurd to me that on June 8th, he can tweet out and say, I'll never compromise. I will never let this get past the Senate. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. And then, here we are less than 2 weeks later, and he's voting for it. I mean, this is just disgusting. As you said, I am disgusted as well. And I think that's an apt term for it.
Yeah, I do too. I look at the characters that are involved. I understand. I see John Cornyn, Senator Cornyn, and he's been a friend, and I've worked with him on many issues. I know that it was Texas and Uvalde, and I know it weighs heavy on a lot of individuals that, are in Texas. But I think I'm very worried that sometimes we get so concerned about an issue, and we think we have to do something, that we fail to take the time to discover what is the right thing to do. And quite frankly, had they decided and pushed to allow teachers to bear arms if they want to give training to individuals, to make adjustments to the way law enforcement respond to these incidents, if they will get rid of the gun-free zones for individuals that have lawful concealed carry permits, you would see a different attitude. These criminals that are coming in that want to kill children, they are picking vulnerable sites that they know that there's going to be the least resistance. And that's what I don't like to see, is a refusal to look at what would actually fix the problem, because children are our dearest resource, and they are afraid. And we're not doing none of these laws that in this agreement that the Congress has reached is going to do anything to stop Uvalde.
Yeah. And my question is, why aren't the Republicans ever pushing back and saying, okay, Democrats, now it's your time to compromise? Like you said, they never reach across the aisle. They never compromise. It's always the Republicans. And so whenever we're faced with a media narrative that is trying to push a certain whether it's a totally heinous act that occurred in Uvalde, or it's a natural disaster, or it's, some other, whatever it is that they want to use that pretext to further their agenda, it's never the Republicans that come back and say, okay, wait a second. When we're talking about doing something, it was you guys back in the summer of 2020 that wanted to defund the police. You don't want to have law enforcement. Mm-hmm. You don't want to ever have, mental health counseling for people, who want it. You want to have all of these people, all of these young kids who are taking all of these hormones and drugs as elective therapy under LGBT. Do you really think that that's going to increase mental health stability in this nation? I mean, why aren't Republicans ever saying, okay, in the context of doing something, then, and the media pushing this, okay, Democrats, it's your turn then to actually listen to us and what we have been saying in all of these fundamental, actually constitutional measures that the Democrats need to compromise on?
Yeah, I think what happens is you see individuals in the Senate, especially, that are there so long, they become friends, and they work. I saw it with Senator Hatch and Senator Ted Kennedy, but that was decades ago, where you had the ability of both sides having some trust in the other, that if you helped them on one project, that they might reciprocate and help on another, because they're no longer meeting in the middle. They're actually pushing across the line and having to meet far left. And that concerns me. Will they understand that that's the case? I don't think so. I think old dogs are tough to teach new tricks. And I think that applies especially right now.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue into talking about January 6th and seeing this complete sham circus of a hearing that's gone on. And, I was talking to some people yesterday in the context of, the ridiculous hearings that we've seen in these public hearings, and just pointing out a few of the facts, that they are going against their resolution and the rules of a select committee to allow the minority leader to put on his own picks. So Jim Banks, Jim Jordan were refused, which is the first time in history for a select committee. You had people like Bernie Kerik, who wanted to testify publicly and was denied that. And yet you only have people that the select committee prefers to hear their testimony without having any cross-examination, any due process. And then they have these spliced together videos that are very selective. They're painted, just like we saw in the first impeachment, like we saw in the Mueller investigation. They're putting on this very tainted Democrat taxpayer-funded commercial that they're not even abiding by the rule of law, basic fundamental fairness. And then they completely ignore any of the evidence that goes against their own narrative, like showing the video of President Trump saying and encouraging people to have their voices peacefully and patriotically heard. They ignored, for example, the fact that I submitted as part of my subpoena over 9,000 pages of documents, including affidavits that were signed under oath by poll watchers, by voters, by election officials, showing how the election was irredeemably compromised. And whether or not those people are credible has never been tested. But to say that it was a completely baseless, no evidence claim just completely denies the fact that they have in their possession on the congressional record right now at least part of the evidence and the basis by which the team Trump, which I was a member, of course, at the time, by which those cases were filed and then kicked out based on standing. It has never been tested on the merits in front of any judicial arbiter. And so to say that there is no evidence and these claims are baseless is just patently false. And so, as you're looking at these types of sham political hearings, Brett, I mean, what else did I miss? And I mean, I think that's kind of a broad overview, but what else, in your opinion, did I miss in terms of how much of a sham and a circus and lack of due process, lack of fairness, fact-finding, truth-seeking, anything for this January 6th committee?
Yeah, I think of two things when I think about January 6th, and I've tried to watch, as much as I can, and I'm actually representing a few people that have been indicted on the January 6th indictments, but the two things that really strike me, one, you have, this is such a far cry from the Warren Commission or the 9/11 Commission, where they were imperfect, but they were certainly bipartisan, and they were led by, two very strong heads of both parties, and they were genuinely seeking to get to the truth. And I just keep thinking about, and I was involved in the 9/11 Commission, and I keep thinking about how, at least the effort was so honest, and there was, good or bad facts were not going to be hidden based on a political position that they needed to take. And there was criticism of both sides, all branches of government that were involved in 9/11 leading up to it. That's not the case here. And then the other thing that strikes me, Jenna, and I think you highlighted this, could you imagine if this was a case that was brought in front of a judge or a jury? Yeah. The judge would be sanctioning the prosecution in this case for refusal to bring forth, exculpatory evidence as well as inculpatory evidence. You would have referrals to OPR, Office of Professional Responsibility, for the, fraudulent representation of some of the evidence. I mean, that's the equivalent of what this group of people who have a clear agenda are doing. In my world, they would be run out of the courtroom. They would be investigated for trying to perpetrate a fraud. But here, they're touted and they are given more of a voice than they should be by both Pelosi, by the media, by the far left. And we'll see what happens when, the Republicans take back the House. Will they be able to present something that is fair, that is outlining of the facts? And I frequently now am telling people that, I have friends who are Democrats who also shake their head a bit, but you don't have people in the Democrat Party right now that are in power that have any sense of wanting to do something in an impartial, bipartisan, fair way.
Yeah, and you are so right that in the world that we come from, which is the court of law and where the rules are actually enforced, and you have a judicial arbiter that is enforcing the rules fairly without being biased or partisan to either the prosecution or the defense. That doesn't happen in the realm of politics at all anymore, and certainly not in the context of this select hearing. And what is, as you were describing, the types of sanctions that would be imposed, the types of ethics rules that would be breached, the type of, constitutional protections like the requirement under Brady that, you have to bring exculpatory evidence. I mean, there are all kinds of things that prosecutors would be required to do in this instance. And then yet you have then the left and the partisan left coming after all of the Trump attorneys, myself included, saying that just because we brought a claim based on the affidavit submitted under oath and the testimony of the people on the ground, that somehow, I should be disbarred because I represented a claim that ultimately was never heard on the merits and just kicked out on standing. That to me is the most absurd thing that could possibly be contemplated and very dangerous for the profession of law.
Yes. Wake up call, I hope, to attorneys that are, conservative in nature. I hope we start to see more lawsuits. We have to have organizations like the Heritage Foundation, the Texas Public Policy Foundation, who are willing to file lawsuits against, the government for some of the action they have. Because right now, if you look at this White House and you look at this Democrat-controlled Congress, and they believe that they have no, restrictions in what they want to do, and they act accordingly. And so far, they're pretty spot on. Nobody is holding them accountable unless we can get them in front of the court and try to pull back some of that power that they have usurped or expanded unconstitutionally. So, thank God there are lawyers like you and others that are out there that are a voice of reason. And, I hope there are more, and I hope they'll start to speak up and act.
I do too. And I hope that I can help in that effort as much as possible, just even in terms of the court of public opinion, by not being silenced, by not being intimidated, by addressing this head on. I mean, a few people asked me yesterday, like, well, do you really want to talk about this on your show? Because, you may get some pushback from the left. I'm thinking, what more can they do? I mean, I even tweeted yesterday, you may have seen this, Brett, and some of the listeners, I don't want you to go necessarily and see this because it's so disgusting, but at the same time, I wanted to post it because I wanted to show what the left does. Because since November 2020, when my phone got doxxed, and I refuse to change my cell phone number just because that would just be a really difficult process, and also why should I? But they have specifically every single time there's been something election integrity related or something related to, representing the Trump campaign and all of that, they will purposefully send me some of the most vile images. They've left me voicemails from phone numbers saying things like you deserve to be raped, saying messages that are death threats. I mean, just absurd, disgusting things. And I'm thinking, do I still live in the United States of America where lawyers for our profession are being harassed, threatened, and intimidated when the Democrats themselves, like the 65 Project, they're openly saying in the bar complaint against me, they're openly saying that they are trying to intimidate lawyers for the future. And they're trying on purpose to take away our livelihood so that we won't ever represent these types of claims anymore. I mean, that should make every lawyer, regardless of your politics, furious.
Yes, that's right.
What's your reaction to this?
Yeah, it's so offensive, and it's a guttural reaction to know that, well-meaning attorneys who have a lot of basis in what they, argue, like yourself, are suffering, these kinds of insults, and, are the victims of such disgusting acts. And yet, you're right about this. It shouldn't matter in politics. We should be able to represent clients. We should be able to push and advocate for them without fear that the mainstream media and the political machinery is not going to like it. And so they're going to attack you personally and drive you from the business. It should also be a wake up call that the left there's nothing they aren't willing to do. And I'm talking not about my good friends who are Democrats, who want to debate the policies and are good people. I'm talking about the fringe on the left. And we have some on the right as well, but some on the left who are now taking it to levels in which the law doesn't matter to them. Abiding by the law doesn't matter. Being hypocrites and having a double standard doesn't matter because the ends are justified, right? You're willing to do anything in order to get the result you want, and that's now the age in which we live. And for me, I don't think that that's the country that I ever thought I'd see that we live in.
Because law is predicated on predictability and on precedent. If it's totally arbitrary, dependent on the partisan political party that's in power, then you have absolutely no ability to truly enact justice and have due process and be able to represent a claim without fear that if it's kicked out on a procedural issue like standing, or say that you're representing a client in a criminal context who ultimately, notwithstanding your zealous representation, gets convicted, then all of a sudden are you going to be looking at losing your bar license because, you represented a guilty party? I mean, we look at people like John Adams, who was probably the hallmark of someone in the very beginning of this country that represented people for due process that was not politically convenient. And so I think, Brett, we have to return to the focus of what does due process mean in this country? And, just in the last few minutes that we have here, what is the solution to just utterly saying no to what the left is trying to do and saying we completely disagree and that violates our founding principles and our rule of law?
Yeah. I do think the lawsuits are important, but what I also think is we need to see our criminal law enforced impartially. We need to see, from the county attorneys to main justice at DOJ in Washington, D.C., we need to see riots that are prosecuted and regardless of whether they're, coming from the left or the right. If we can, as a country, start to see that there are repercussions for this extremism, this vigilantism, if we can see that happens, then maybe we start the dialogue of how to get back to, the use of a law and order society and the strength of a law and order society. But I think until politics is taken out of those vital, organizations across this country, you're going to continue to see this kind of action, and the public is taking note. And I think that's why you're seeing a real, response to Biden and his administration that I don't think they anticipated was going to be as wide and as deep as it is against their policies.
But so well said, Brett. And I so appreciate you joining me today, and tell people where they can find you.
Thanks, Jenna. I love being with you. And, please reach out. Your listeners are important. They need to. I'm the executive director at riotoncrime.com. And, our focus in this country is to try to, preserve public safety and remember victims of crime, and at the same time fix the criminal justice system that needs a lot of fixing. So thanks for the opportunity, and I can't wait till we're chatting again.
Yeah, sounds good. I think tomorrow, Thursday, on John Bachman's show. So everyone tune into Newsmax for sure. And Brett, I'll look forward to having you on again. Thank you so much for your insights, your wisdom, and for all of what you're fighting for as well. I really appreciate it. And it's been great to get to know you. So thank you for coming on.
You too.
Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903. I also want to talk about another great American who is the sponsor of this podcast, and that, of course, is my good friend Mike Lindell. He has been canceled out of so many box stores for simply standing up for his own political opinion. And disagree or not, or support him or not, it is a fundamental right of every American to be able to voice their opinion, and that absolutely includes politics. That absolutely includes issues that are central to our culture. That includes faith. Mike is such a very sincere Christian, and I am proud to consider him a friend, and he is, of course, a friend of this show. So right now, there is a special on MyPillow.com. Click on the new radio listener specials. Get deep discounts on all MyPillow products, including a great towel set, which is a 6-piece set. It includes 2 bath, 2 hand towels, 2 washcloths, made in the USA, regularly $109.99, now just $39.99, but you have to use the promo code Jenna. That's Jenna. That tells Mike that you listen to this show, you're happy that he is a sponsor of this show, and you will get great discounts, but use the promo code Jenna, that's Jenna, either at mypillow.com or call 1-800-564-8475 and use the promo code Jenna.